Welcome to LEA 540. This is lesson 4 in dealing with leveraging innovation. We are again going into diagnosing organizations. And just to remind you again, the reason why we're looking at the process of diagnosing an organization is because it's one thing to have an innovation. It's one thing to have some ideas about maybe some changes that you'd like to make. It's another thing to actually know where to implement those changes and how to know what the organization really needs in order to be able to revitalize or what have you. So we're looking here at Harrison's model for diagnosing individual and group behavior. We've been talking a little bit, we used the open system models earlier in one of our lectures. We talked about the significance of having a relationship with the decision makers that are actually going to help you to do that. The open systems model, of course, shows you the areas that an organization needs to be functioning properly in. And then we talked about what a healthy organization looks like. So today we're going to be dealing specifically with, really we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about group level behavior as opposed to individual level behavior. We're going to be talking about some of that. But it all begins really with, at the organizational level, what it is that they're trying to do and is that functioning properly. So a good example of this is to, when you take a base look at the organization itself, is it performing the way that it should? Its purposes, its processes, you'd want to look at that. Is it actually being able to accomplish what they're desiring to accomplish? Look at their structure, their technology, some of their behavior, their culture. All of this reflects the outputs that's taking place. Now, if they've called you in, or if you're in the organization and you feel like that you're wanting to make some type of innovation, obviously something is not going as good as it could be going, or it might even be going wrong. And at that point, that's when we start pinpointing and we start looking at some things to diagnose and to see exactly where we are in all of this. So the first place that we want to look at is in group level performance, or our group performance. And as we look at the group performance, we're really wanting to see how well the group is functioning in terms of their outputs. You want to make sure that they're actually being able to perform the task as a group in a very expeditious manner, because if it's a wrong fit or something like that, it can just be detrimental to an organization. So let's look at some of these key group factors that you would want to look at and to see if maybe there's something that's gone awry, something that's wrong. So the first thing is social and occupational composition. This is dealing with the mix of members. This can be true especially if you have a global organization and maybe you've got an office where you have a lot of Americans versus maybe a lot of locals in an overseas office, and how is that mix taking place. But you can also see this cultural diversity even in your workplace if you all happen to be in America or all in the same country, and yet there are different cultures, different perspectives in the ways that they go into this. And you might want to look at this and see, are there some cultural barriers there that is causing some speed bumps or is causing some problems within the organization? And then you might want to look at the structure. For instance, the extent of the rules, the type of work, and the decision procedures. How are decisions made? Who gets to make those decisions? sometimes you have some people and they want to put you in a group and say, now you folks, listen, you're in charge of this. We want you to do this. But they don't have any power to make any decisions, and the recommendations that they make, normally there's not much that goes with that. Another thing that might, what are the standard operating procedures that are going on? Because you might find that there's something, where that you've got one person that's doing all of the work in terms of all of the fun stuff or all of the things that's creative, and you got the other people that are just kind of flunkies and just doing busy work, and they're very demotivated, and so this makes for a poor structure as well. So you want to look at the structure of the group itself and how it's working. What are the roles? What are the procedures and that sort of thing? You might even want to take a look at the technology that's taking place, because this could have an impact on group processes. For instance, noise prevents conversation. If there's just too much noise, people aren't conversing. They're not talking with one another. Maybe the office layout, uh, does it encourage or discourage contact with one another? How about workflow interdependencies, where that people have an opportunity to run things by one another as they're working in a group? Because what you're really looking for in most group situations is synergy, which is that the substance of the group or the outcome of the group is greater than that of the individual. And so you want to look for some of these things. And then finally, you might want to look at some of the group behavior. Um, and I'm talking here about relationships amongst the group members. Um, is there a cohesiveness there? Do people have an attachment to the group? Is there a similarity of views? Is there a similarity of behavior? Or do you sense that there is some conflict that's taking place there? Is some person, because maybe that they don't act just like everybody else, that there are some people through the law of least effort, uh, try to take the path of least resistance, and they just avoid those people. And the problem with that is that they're losing out on a valuable perspective. And so this might be a problem when you're looking at group behavior. Well, then there are some processes that you might want to look at. And so um, rewarding is one process. What are the types of behaviors that are rewarded? If is conformity versus individuality? Do you want everybody to think alike, talk alike, everybody to have the same perspective? It's so funny. There are so many leaders that have this idea that they want everybody to be exactly alike, and yet they want there to be some variety of opinion. Um, and it's a lazy man's way out, is what it really is. Um, how about what's the process of delivering rewards? Is it just random? I mean, do people know, hey, listen, if I do this and if I work hard, if I get my work done, if I come up with innovative ideas, if I'm doing things, is that going to be rewarded? Or is it, well, it's just random, whoever they like, that's who they reward, and that sort of thing? That's a process that might need to be looked at because it becomes a demotivator. Another thing is communication. And you might want to look at the direction of the flow of communication. Does it flow up? Does it flow down? Does it flow across department lines? I know that there are some people that they become so siloed and isolated that they don't want you to be talking to other departments. They don't want you to deal with other departments. I've dealt with that myself, where there's been problems in that. Another thing is openness and honesty. I always love it when people say, I want you to be honest. You can say anything you want. Um, don't always believe that, because that's not always true. So be very careful with that. Make sure you know the person and what they're saying, because some people say that, but they don't really want to hear that. Uh, and yet that is honestly having somebody talk straight, give their opinion. Um, Even if you disagree with that, it's good to hear that. I'm a conservative in terms of my political views, and I'm reading a book right now. It's called The Nine. I know that it was written from a liberal perspective. I already know that. And it's funny, everything that they say about it's about the Supreme Court, and everything that they say about the conservative judges on the Supreme Court is always in a negative vein. And sometimes you can even sense some hostility. But yet I'm reading it because I find it very interesting, and I just realize the perspective that they're coming from. And I say that to say sometimes it's good to hear some things that might not necessarily be your perspective or what you were thinking. So that's important. Communication. And then cooperation and conflict. There's some other processes there that you might want to look at. For example, um, what are the sources of conflict or cooperation? Um, what's the extent? What's the nature of conflict or cooperation? What has to happen? Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about in case this doesn't make sense to you. Um, you might have a person that they as long as you're saying what they want to hear, then you're in cooperation with them. But the moment that you veer off the path with maybe a new idea or an innovative idea, this brings conflict. Well, that's important to understand. What is the nature of that? Another thing is conflict management. When there is conflict, how do they handle it? How do you handle it? This is something to look at to see if maybe this is a factor that's maybe causing some problems amongst the group. Um, is there a place for bargaining? Uh, is it just rather being forced, or maybe forcing a solution by uh, a superior and say, no, this is the way it has to be. And it's going to be that way instead of the group coming up with ideas. And then finally, on decision making methods, uh, how much participation does a person have in the decision making? Um, and even in problem solving, some of the methods, confrontation, avoidance, all of those things. So this may be a problem. And then we've got just two left on group factors, but also supervisory behavior. Does the supervisors is the organization, is it conducive to success? Have they created an environment for success? So some supervisory behavior, is it supportive? In other words, do they encourage learning? Do they provide help? Do they provide resources? What kind of level of participation do they have in this? Uh, do they, in terms of, do they share information? Do they share in the decision making? How about task emphasis? Do they stress goal achievement? Do they stress common purposes? Maybe the level of and the nature of performance expectations. What kind of effort and quality do they expect? What is their style of communication? How do they handle conflict? All of these things need to be looked at when you're looking at the group factors. Is there a problem maybe in the supervision of that? Some supervisors, honestly, um, they're micromanagers. They may not know how to actually supervise a group, especially of professionals. And that really, when you have professionals, normally these are people that are independent, and so we would call them self-directed work teams. And then the supervisor becomes a matter of oversight and a liaison uh, to the group from the actual organization, trying to get things accomplished. And then finally, is there a problem with the culture? the group identity. Is there a consensus? Is there clarity about goals? This is a biggie. What are you really wanting to accomplish? And this is important because sometimes the organization might say they want something, but then their actions suggest that they really are wanting something else. So what is there clarity about goals, values? What's valuable here? What's important here? Some of the norms. Um, Trust. How about confidence in your peers? Do you believe that they truly should be there and that you have respect for their abilities? Um, and some of the other things that are here that you might want to look at, um, really challenges maybe the fit gap between the group norms and maybe what you're looking to have. So all of these things, you would look at these things honestly and say, can I pinpoint specifically where the problem is? Because that may be where then you need to put the innovation. That may be where you need to implement the change. Maybe that's where something needs to take place. This brings me then to individual performance because maybe the problem is not so much the group as much as maybe it's an individual factor here. And so let's look at some of the individual factors that might be there. The first factor is the quality of work life factor. And the quality of life or quality of work factor, this deals with employees' psychological and material well-being in terms of the employee's levels of satisfaction with certain conditions. So here's the conditions. Job security. If you're always, if you're worried, boy, is this job going to be here? Um, if they don't like me, are they going to fire me on a whim? Um, these are things, this causes stress and can inhibit the ability to work. Sometimes fairness and adequacy of pay. Um, you got some people and they're doing the same job and yet they're getting paid more. You have some people and for instance, they're allowed to be promoted and you're not because of some other factor. These all can, of course, diminish the motivation of the individual. Working conditions. Sometimes, you can be in a bad situation, a situation where the conditions are just not very good. The lighting's poor, the office is inadequate, whatever the case is. Sometimes it's interpersonal relations where you have people that are they just don't get along for whatever reason. They're not a good fit. Maybe there's bias there. I hate to say that, but sometimes maybe there's bias. And then the big one, though, that really diminishes the quality of work life has to do with meaningfulness and the challenge of the work. You would see this now. You would obtain this information through interviews. You can also use objective and subjective indicators of the health and well-being. But and by the way, that would be, for instance, job-related illnesses, accidents, substance abuse on or off the job, sometimes stress. All of these things can indicate this if the person feels like that there is a good quality of work-life environment or whether it's toxic. And then let me give you some other key individual factors that you might want to look at. And one of those individual factors is individuals' characteristics can shape people's motivation to perform a task and their ability to do so. So individual characteristics would be one thing. Let me give you an example of this. Their physical or mental state, their health, in other words, their abilities, job-related traits. Are they, physically able to do the job? Um, you might find that it's just the job that they're doing, what they're, that they just physically they can't do it. Sometimes social background and traits, for instance, their sex, their age, their ethnicity, their uh, maybe from a regional or cultural background, uh, is having an effect on them uh, in terms of their motivation to be able to do a task. Uh, Let me give you maybe just an example of this. You've got a person who is very young and athletic, and she is a go-getter, and she is having to do a job that is just, I mean, mind numbing. It is so boring. It is so without, and just the fact, it just drives her crazy because she just absolutely, it doesn't fit her personality. It doesn't fit her characteristics. This is what we're talking about with that. Another thing that has to do with that is training and education. How much formal education do you have, or technical training, or work experience? All of these things plays a factor in this. Um, a person who's older and has been uh, has been working for a long time doesn't want to be treated like that that they're just getting into the workforce. And so sometimes this is an issue. Sometimes formal education is. Sometimes personal values, their beliefs, their assumptions, their attitudes. There are some work environments, and there are some people. I know one in particular that she actually is associated with a company that I do consulting for. And the interesting thing about her, she is first of all, the nicest lady. Boy, you just can't help but like her. But she has such a potty mouth. I mean, she just lets the F bomb go. And, she offended some people and that sort of thing. She felt bad about it. She said she's sorry, but she's kind of gruff that way. She just kind of talks. She wasn't calling them, by the way, a name. It's just kind of the way she uses it in conversation. Well, for a person like me, who is a Christian and a conservative Christian, evangelical, these sorts of things, um, it was a little bit offensive to me. Now, I'm a mature enough Christian and been around work behavior long enough that, you can get used to a lot of things and, get along with that. But for some people, this might be a real issue for them. And so I say that to say that sometimes personal values can have a problem with that. And then individual needs. Um, the importance of various types of rewards. At you might be a person that really, uh, you need that title, you need that promotion for that. You might be a person that, listen, titles are one thing, but show me the money because of where you are. So these are individual characteristics that can play into the motivational factors that are at play at work. And then you'll notice that there are job characteristics. And this is important because this deals with the pay and the benefits. We talked about that a little bit. The meaningfulness, the task identity, the variety, the significance, the routineness, the fact that it's the same thing, the same, all the time. People get bored, quality of work goes down. Accountability. You'll find that especially in today's society, that younger people, millennials and beyond, now we're starting to get to, I think, Generation Z, but in all of this, that they like autonomy and they like independence. They like to be able to make decisions. And so it becomes a tricky thing for managers, but um, especially with this particular group, and I think with most people, employees like to be responsible for important results. Um, and then there's feedback. Um, I think that employees, are they getting feedback on their work? Are they able to actually see the results that are taking place? Um, is there clarity and ambiguity as it relates to their responsibilities and their assignments? Um, and especially when you get to the expectations as well. I think that's an important thing as well. And so I've got everything going off here while we're talking. So these are some things to look at when you start dealing with some of the job characteristics. Job security is also another biggie. People don't like to feel like that their job could be here one day and then gone the next. So job security is a big one. And then individual orientations. Um, are they motivated to work well? Are they motivated to remain on the job? Um, are rewards experienced? And from an extrinsic uh, aspect, which is their pay, their benefits, their security, promotion prospects, peer approval, social status, non-monetary compensation such as flexible hours, training opportunities, physical conditions, location, and then intrinsic factors such as does the job, is it felt to be interesting? Is it challenging? Does it provide for personal growth, personal learning, a feeling of accomplishment? And then there's expectations, and that is when you start dealing with the link between performance and valued rewards. In other words, does promotion depend on good works or results, or does promotion depend on who you are? Um, does it depend on whether you are in the good old boys club or the good girls club or whatever it happens to be? Um, Consequences of effort, initiative, and innovation. In other words, what happens to people who find new ways of doing things? Are they rewarded for that? Or is that just something that is there? How about the ability to get things done? Is that rewarded? How about equity? Feeling that efforts are fairly rewarded compared to others in the organization and to other organizations. Is there an equity there? There's a theory that's Adam's equity theory that this goes along with. You might want to look that up. Uh, Trust is another one. Can I rely on my peers? Can I rely on my managers? Um, do I believe in them? Do they believe in me? And then specific attitudes, satisfaction toward an assessment of current proposed projects and changes. Um, is there grievance mechanisms? Are there things that because are they soured? I guess is basically what I'm saying. Can you detect that these people are really soured right now? Because if they're soured, you're not going to get the best work out of them. Oh, you may get enough work where that they're doing what they're supposed to do, but to go beyond that, that's what's going to be missing. Well, the reason we're looking at this is because again, we have to figure out where the innovation needs to take place at. And so when you start looking at the three levels here, first of all is the organization structured correctly? Number two, is there a problem in the teams or in the group behavior, the group dynamics? Or finally, is it on an individual level where we're having some problems, where there may be a problem with this individual and what's causing the problem? You know, the problem isn't always, well, we need to disband the group or we need to fire the individual. It might be that, hey, there are contributing factors to this, that if we can modify those factors, we can actually get some really quality and good work out of this. So hopefully that's been a help to you in diagnosing organizations. And I will look forward to seeing you next week and where we'll be finishing up our lectures on this important subject.